And welcome back. Now, the Independent Electoral Commission, that's the IEC, says that it's happy with the manner in which yesterday's by-elections went across the country. The polls were contested in 24 wards across 17 municipalities in the 9 provinces. The IEC also says that there were no reported disruptions in voting and that all stakeholders appear satisfied with yesterday's proceedings. However, there was rain in Mangaung and also an altercation between an IEC and EFF official. So joining us now to give us an update is Masego Sheburi, who's the IEC Deputy Chief Electoral Officer. Mr. Sheburi, welcome once more to Morning Live. Good to see you.
Good morning.
So firstly, the IEC painting, quite a rosy picture, if you will, of yesterday's proceeding. But there seems to have been a few challenges. Would you concur with that?
With every big project, there are bound to be areas of future improvement, and we take lessons from those. But on the whole, we are happy with our performance. We've availed opportunities to residents in 24 wards to select their public representatives, starting on the 8th when we administered 6,000 votes for persons who, but for special vote, would not have been able to participate. Again, yesterday we opened all our 118 voting stations to receive in excess of 171,000 voters who were eligible to participate in those by-elections. We are happy with the conduct of voters, party agents, as well as independent candidates, and also with the observance of the public health measures that we have had to put at voting stations to ensure that by-elections do not become platform for the further spread of the coronavirus.
Speaking of Mr. Sheburi, of course, the COVID-19 restrictions specifically, how did you fare in that regard? And also, as I understand, there may have been one area where people actually didn't wear masks. If you can just confirm that for us and how that was dealt with.
There have been instances where voters presented themselves at voting station without masks or appropriate face coverings. And in terms of our own protocols to safeguard the staff and also to safeguard the general voting public, we refused those persons entry into voting station until such time that they had proper coverings or mask before they could access voting station. But as I say, those were very isolated and rare instances yesterday.
Mr. Sheburi, let's just get some clarity on the spat between the Secretary General of the EFF, Marshal Dlamini, who clashed with IEC Commissioner Glenn Mashinini at one of the voting stations. So Dlamini was aggrieved, as we understand, by what he termed unfair treatment of the EFF when he was removed from the voting station at the time when Mr. Mashinini was visiting. So according to Mashinini, this was due to party agents and non-officials not being permitted within the voting stations. Can you just give us clarity from the IEC's perspective on what happened there?
As you say, the matter will be dealt with between the IEC and the affected political parties. Suffice just to say that at the voting station on voting day, political parties are entitled to be represented by party agents who cannot be more than 2 at any given point. But also, given the configuration of a voting station, we had agreed with political parties that for purposes of observing social distancing, where the voting station cannot accommodate 2 party agents, we will then ask political parties to be represented by a single party agent, and the parties will take turns in observing on a rotational basis. The matter that was reported yesterday will be dealt with between the party and the IEC, and then we will update the South African public on the outcome of that instance.
Fair enough, but it is a matter already out in the public domain, and hence I said it's just at this point seeking clarity on what is already purported to have happened, because Mr. Dlamini, in his words, claims that they threw out EFF officials and not other political party officials. And also the attendance register, what happened to that at that particular polling station?
We maintain a register that is maintained by the presiding officer in which they indicate all events at the voting station, issues that are worthy of reporting, including the presence of party agents. As it is, we have noted that incident, but would rather do a thorough investigation and issue a public statement once we have looked at all the issues. For now, we have noted the incident, we acknowledge that it did indeed take place, and we are dealing with it.
Mr. Sheburi, the issue of rain in Mangaung, was voting disrupted in any way at all because of this, or did it all go according to plan?
The inclement weather did not have an adverse effect on our voting processes. When we checked with the province, they said that still receiving steady stream of persons, and that it would have seemed that the majority of persons who were intent on voting had already voted before the weather turned.
And then the issue of homeless people and their right to vote. And I see a Daily Maverick also picked up on this and highlighting the issue of homelessness and not being able to vote. And they make mention of Greenpoint in Cape Town, where residents voted. But of course, since homeless people do not have residential addresses, they cannot vote. Again, can I have confirmation on that in terms of how that was dealt with? And perhaps we can also just delve a little bit into this, because as it stands, you have to have some sort of residential address to vote in the by-elections. And the national elections, that of course will be coming up at some point. Not so strict though on that particular matter, but let's just touch on that in terms of homelessness and people being allowed to vote.
Since the Constitutional Court judgment in the Mhlophe and Kham matters in 2016, an address has assumed an almost conditioned precedent to free and fair election. But it is important to make this distinction. A person who is a South African citizen who does not have an address is still entitled to register and to vote. All that we need when we register that person is that we must get a description of a place in which that person ordinarily resides. The crafters of our constitution and electoral scheme were acutely aware of the uneven development in the country, and therefore they would not have elevated an address to extent that it trumps the constitutional and political rights of citizens to participate, to shape affairs of their country. So a person without an address will provide a description of where they ordinarily reside. We will capture that as in their address, and they'll be entitled to vote. Similarly, a person who is registered already and for whom we still do not have an address on the voters' roll, that person is entitled to vote, and we are underscoring that right by sponsoring legislative amendments that are currently before the NCOP to make it abundantly clear that those categories of citizens are still entitled to vote, but they must supply an address or a description of a place of ordinary residence before they are allowed to participate. That is to ensure that only persons who are ordinarily resident in the ward are entitled to participate and influence the outcome of an election. So persons enjoy political rights because they are citizens and not because they have an address.
But what does that mean for a homeless person? If I live under the M1 bridge, am I allowed to vote, or are the residents then allowed to kick me out?
No, the residents are not allowed to kick you out. A place of abode or an address is not a condition to register and to enjoy political rights. If you get to a registration point, you give us a description to say, I consider the bridge on the intersection of M1 and Smith Street as my place of ordinary residence. And if that description has a nexus with the ward in which you want to register, we are under a constitutional obligation to enroll you on the list of voters for that particular segment of the voters' roll. And even if a objection were to be raised against your right to participate, we as an election management body will be hard pressed not to extend the right of franchise to those category of persons. So persons without addresses are entitled to register and are entitled to vote, and the Electoral Commission is intent on securing those rights and making it clear in law that those persons are still entitled to participate and influence affairs of their communities.
And as we wrap it, any update on the election results themselves, or will those be released later?
We will issue a statement earlier in the morning, but however, the results are already on our website. We've recorded a 28% voter turnout for the by-elections. In all the 24 wards, most parties have retained their seats. There have been, however, a number of seats that have changed. In the Bushbuck Ridge area, the Bushbuck Ridge Resident Association has lost 3 seats that have been gained by the ANC. Similarly, in the Overstrand area in the Western Cape, the ANC has lost a seat to the Land Party, and in Oudtshoorn, the DA has conceded 2 wards to the ANC in the by-elections yesterday.
Mr. Sheburi, thanks so much for your time. Masego Sheburi from the IEC giving us an update about yesterday's by-elections in 24 wards across 17 municipalities in all the country's 9 provinces. So that's how those by-elections went. And now moving along, we promised you 2